Sorry, I was eating a Girl Scout cookie, and noticed that the film strip had ended. Let's think about the farm. What it was like to live on a farm and work on the farm in pioneer days. Enjoy. And noticed that the film strip had ended. Let's think.
In the early 1800s, in every new settlement, each member of the family had to help with the farming because life depended on the success or failure of the crops. Children understood the importance of this, and if they lived on a farm, learned to help with the chores when they were very young. Working side by side with their parents, they learned to gather the eggs, chop wood, and feed the farm animals. Almost as soon as a boy could walk, he would be taught to yoke the oxen. He learned to control them from an early age, as they were used for many tasks. As soon as the fields were cleared of stumps, the farmer would be anxious to plow and prepare the soil for the first crops. As the oxen pulled the wooden plow, the iron plowshare bit into the soil and turned it into a furrow. They walked up and down the field making furrows with the plow. It was a lot of hard work, and after plowing the field, it still was not ready for planting. Depending on regional climates and growing conditions, crops varied in importance. However, two crops were of prime importance, for they provided food and clothing. These crops were wheat and flax. The bigger clumps of earth were broken up with an instrument called a harrow. The farmer was able to build his own harrow, as it was a simple wooden frame that had large spikes driven through the wood. Because the newly turned soil was rich with humus, it fell apart as soon as the harrow touched it. Humus is the natural decaying vegetable matter in new soil. The pioneers did not need fertilizers because their soil was very rich with nourishment. After harrowing, when the farmer was satisfied that his fields were ready for planting, a seeder was filled with wheat or flaxseed. Walking slowly up and down the field, the farmer's son tossed or broadcast the seed by hand. Corn was a welcome change as a vegetable and also supplied fodder for the pigs and cattle. The settlers learned to plant corn the way the Indians planted theirs, in little hills with several seeds to each hole. As the wheat ripened ready for the harvest, the grain cradle was sharpened in readiness for cutting it. The farmer cut swaths of grain which toppled neatly into the fingers of the cradle and then slid into a row on the ground. This row was called a windrow, and the farmer walked in the row gathering the grain into sheaves. Using a binder's knot, he then tied the sheaves securely. Several sheaves were piled together to dry in the sun. At threshing time, the sheaves were lined up with their heads together for flailing. Flailing was one of the hardest farming chores. It separated the grain from the wheat stems. Practice was needed to bring the flail down and strike the head of the sheep so that the kernels of grain were knocked on the floor. The grain from the floor was carefully shoveled into a blanket or basket. The grain was shaken in the basket to separate the skins of the grain, called chaff. The doors of the barn were opened to create a draft which blew the lighter chaff away, leaving the heavier grain on the floor. The grain was poured into the hand quern, which was used to grind it into flour. The top stone was rotated, while the bottom one remained stationary. This crushed the grain between the stones. The flour that poured out through the opening was very coarse, but wholesome. This flour was baked into delicious bread. As the community grew, a miller came to the area and built a fine flour mill by a stream so that he could use water power to make his machines work. Water power was made by the force of water moving downhill to turn the great wooden wheel. The water wheel, in turn, drove all the working parts of the mill machinery. The new mill meant less back-breaking work at the hand quern. The miller tested the flow of the grain into the hood. Periodically, the miller would check to be sure that the farmer's grain was being ground properly. Once the miller was satisfied with the texture and quality of flour, it was bagged and ready for the farmer. The miller had customers who did not have ready cash to pay for their milling, so he was often paid in toll. That is, he kept one bag of grain in 10 as payment for milling. Flax was the other main crop in the community. When the field of flax had ceased blooming and dropped its flowers, seed pods that looked like small balls formed near the end of the stems. The flax plants were then pulled from the ground by hand to preserve the longest possible fiber. Hidden in the stem of the plant was a length of fiber that, carefully worked, could provide linen for clothing the family. When the flax was properly cured and dried, the seed balls were removed by a process called rippling. A small wooden comb was drawn through the heads, and as the seeds came off, they were stored to use as seed for the following year's crop. The surplus could be sent to an oil mill where the linseed oil was extracted. The next step in processing the flax was the retting of the plants. The bundles of flax straw were placed in a stream and weighted down with stones for several days. When the water had dissolved enough of the gummy mucilage that held the outside fibers to the core, the flax was taken from the stream and spread out to dry. After the bundles were opened, the farmer took a handful of the flax straw and crushed the inner core with a hand brake. The handful of flax was taken to the scutcher, or swinger, where the blades continued to beat off the pieces of core still clinging to the fibers. This motion was repeated many times. By drawing the fibers through the heckles, which resembled sharp iron teeth set on a board, the fibers were combed out and separated, leaving short, broken, or twisted fibers used for making yarn to be woven into coarse cloth sacks or bed ticks, or spun into yarn large enough for wicking for lamps and candles, string and rope. The fine fibers were now ready to be spun. Fall brought the ripening corn, and the settler couldn't resist a look at the ears to see if they were plump and full and ready to be harvested. As winter approached and the settler gathered his harvest, the family knew that the plentiful crops would provide a good supply of food for the table until the following year.
Yeah, so that was very Canadian. I don't know if you heard the narrator's accent. It kind of popped out a little bit. All right. What I want to know is how to build better sentences. I can make sentences, but how can I make them better? Let's find out together. Enjoy.
We have a treat today. Tony, Bob, and Alan have just finished their story. In fact, they came in early and wrote the first part on the board. I think it's a fine start. But remember, even if we like it as a story, our project is to analyze it, to see whether we can improve sentence structure. Now, our three authors may find it hard to be critics, especially of their own work. But I think they can do the job. Yes, Tony?
Do you mean we're supposed to find things wrong in our own story?
That's the idea of improvement, evaluating your own work. Alan, why don't you read?
The year is 2000 A.D. The United States of America has just sent a spaceship to the planet Mars. In the spaceship are two American astronauts. They are very well trained and are named Edgar Wilson and Michael Wagner. They are both able to work the rocket engines that their spaceship is propelled by. Our story is about this trip to Mars. It is also about the astronauts' adventures. As we look in on them, Edgar points to the instrument panel. "Say, Mike," he says, "the fuel is running low."
Well, good. Now we have to begin somewhere. Why don't we start with the third sentence? In the spaceship are two American astronauts.
There's nothing wrong with that, is there?
Well, not really, Alan. It's a perfectly good sentence. But perhaps we can do better. Now, does anyone know how we might improve that sentence? Here's a hint. Remember Monday, we talked about eliminating
unnecessary words.
Right, Tony. Now, it may be unnecessary in this sentence.
In the spaceship are two American astronauts.
American. That's unnecessary. It already says that America sent the astronauts. So we don't have to use the adjective American here.
Very good, Bob. Tony and Alan, why don't you try too? And perhaps we can improve the story still more. Now let's see. What about the sentence that starts, "They are very well trained"? What's that all about?
That's compounding. We brought two simple sentences together and used a conjunction, and.
But it reads, "They are very well trained and are named Edgar Wilson and Michael Wagner." It sounds like if they had different names, they wouldn't be well trained.
There could be something wrong with the sentence.
Who wants to try to fix it? That's the way, Tony.
but I don't know how to fix it.
Well, the thoughts in this sentence and the next one are related. So why not, for the time being, leave out the clause that Bob crossed out and connect the first clause with the following sentence. There. They are very well trained and are both able to work the rocket engines that their spaceship is propelled by. But what are the names?
Why not put it at the end of the sentence before?
Good idea. There. What do you think of that? But there's still room for improvement. For instance, we found that it gets the idea across better when we use a verb in its active voice. Remember? Well then, tell me, Alan, what was your reason for putting the verb propel here in the passive?
We had a good reason, Miss Crane. Whatever it was.
In any case, we have two choices. That their spaceship is propelled by, or rocket engines that propel their spaceship. Which sounds better?
Propel, the active voice.
I think we all agree. Now, do you see anything else?
It still doesn't look right.
Look at this conjunction, and. Is this a clue? A conjunction means...
Compounding.
Right, Alan. And when we compound, sides of the conjunction should be of equal importance. Now, if you believe that the facts that they're very well trained and that they're able to work the engines are equally important here...
Wait, they're not equally important. One depends on the other.
You've got it, Alan. And if one thought depends on the other, which word should we remove?
The and?
Well, let's see. Well, now we have a... What kind of a sentence is this, Tony?
A transform, but we have two R's.
Alan, why don't you read the sentence? Leaving out the...
They are very well trained, both able to work the rocket engines that propel their spaceship.
There's still something wrong.
Maybe it has something to do with which of these two thoughts is more important. Which is?
That they're able to work the engines.
Right, Alan. It makes sense that the subject should be placed with that thought. How's that?
But isn't there something wrong with the next paragraph, too?
Something you can fix, Bob? All right, but is the story really about this trip, or is it about the adventures of the astronauts?
We wanted it to be about the adventures.
Then why don't we erase the part about adventures from here and put it here? Our story is about the astronauts' adventures during this trip to Mars. How do you like your story now?
Do you think we need the part about being well-trained?
I mean, all astronauts are well-trained, so I think I'd like to take that out.
Do you think it'll work, Tony?
I think so.
Yes, you see, to make written work look finished, we have to take out obvious things. What kinds of things do you think they are?
Like using the same words over and over.
In view of that, what would you say about this word?
We've used it in the sentence before.
And this?
If we just say their names, that's enough.
Good. In the ship are two astronauts, Edgar Wilson and Michael Wagner. We seem to be finished. But it may be wise to go back to see if our words are expressing our exact meanings. For example, the United States of America has just launched, more exact, see, a spaceship toward the planet Mars. Isn't that better? Manning. You see, that's exactly what they were doing. Manning the ship are two astronauts, Edgar Wilson and Michael Wagner. Like to read it now, Alan?
The year is 2000 A.D. The United States of America has just launched a spaceship toward the planet Mars. Manning the ship are two astronauts, Edgar Wilson and Michael Wagner. Our story is about the astronauts' adventures during this trip to Mars. As we look in on them, Edgar points to the instrument panel. "Say, Mike," he says, "the fuel is running low. You know, now that we've fixed it, I think it does read better."
It does. And perhaps you'll want to look at some of the sentences in your own stories and compositions to see if they say what you mean and tell your story exactly the way you want to tell it. You'll find it fun to tell your story the right way, the exciting way, by building better sentences.
Couldn't they have had at least one girl? Yeah, that was, wow. Not a whole lot of money spent on that one. They, just used their classroom set. They just had a blackboard that they cleaned. Somebody wrote, yeah, super cheap. They saved a bunch of money on that, which in my mind translates to not being a very good film, because what they're talking about is not, the story's interesting, but the way they're talking about it is not very compelling at all. All right, so we've been watching a lot of Cornet films because the people that own Cornet have sent us 9,000 cans of film, 9,000 plus, and we are slowly going through and scanning them, and so that was one of the scintillating things. This is a film that's fascinating because this basically talks about how to use educational films in your classroom to enrich learning and teaching, but is also a commercial for Cornet Films. We showed one of these not too long ago, and it was for a religious film company, Cathedral Films. Similar thing. It was basically like, look how great this Sunday school is by showing this film, and then the discussion that can be had in following classes, etc., etc. So this is a thing. I think Encyclopedia Britannica has one. I think they all have one, because they're just like, we have footage. We'll just use footage from our films to prove our point and talk about how great educational films are for training. We know how great educational films are. So there you go. Here's new dimensions through teaching films. Enjoy.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think this concludes our session on film usage today. I hope you found it helpful.
Oh, yes, excellent. Wonderful.
I think it was a very rewarding session.
Well, thank you, Mr. Boardman.
Jack, I wish that more people in our county, teachers, principals, AV directors, superintendents, curriculum, and library personnel, I wish they could have shared this past hour with us.
Well, perhaps we can repeat this session. I'd certainly like to try. Well, actually, there is a way we can share our experiences with you through film. We can repeat the meeting we held here the other day. It was part of a teacher institute we held in our instructional materials center. Our center serves about 150 schools. Here we offer to all our school personnel the usual resource materials. Include periodicals and curriculum materials, films, film strips, maps, charts, and globes, tapes, and records, learning programs, various kinds of models, and, of course, the equipment for using AV materials. School personnel who use the center and help to direct it include teachers, attendants, audiovisual directors, our curriculum coordinator, and our supervising librarian. To help prepare our session on film usage, I had the help of one of our most enthusiastic AV directors.
I think I have all the film clips that were requested for the meeting, Jack. Fine. I'm glad we're stressing film usage.
Ed, you wouldn't be prejudiced for films now, would you?
You know I am.
Say, here's something that'll interest you. It's a recent study of an instructional materials center done by a survey team at your old alma mater. Read it.
This committee believes most audio-visual experts agree that the film library, especially on the county level, is the heart of any instructional materials center. An adequate collection of films, properly used, is basic to a film educational program today. Well, that's what I've been preaching for years. You know, Jack, it's time we realize that educational films have come of age.
Ed was right. At the meeting we set up, we stressed film usage. And I'd asked various teachers to give examples of film use in the classroom. Now, let me show you what happened. I'd like to present Miss Spaulding, primary teacher at Lincoln School, who will tell us about using language arts films in the primary grades. Miss Spaulding?
Thank you. I'm not going to make a speech, but I have a few excerpts from films, and I'll talk about them. I use many primary films that are designed to provide a background for reading and expression. Ready? For developing reading skills, we often begin with material they know. For kindergarten or first grade, I might start with a favorite story, such as Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Relating words to images such as these can make reading an exciting adventure. The children relate quickly to familiar friends, such as Baby Bear or Mama Bear. From the make-believe house of the Three Bears, we might go to a more realistic story, such as The Ugly Duckling. In film, we can share the trials and triumph of the Ugly Duckling together.
"Can you purr?" said the cat. "No," said the Ugly Duckling. "Lay egg?" "No," said the Ugly Duckling, and he felt quite useless.
When we have experienced the whole story and have actually seen the transformation of the duckling from this into this, I get enthusiastic response in oral expression as my youngsters retell the story. For vocabulary building, for developing word meanings, I use films designed for the purpose. Can you think of a better way to introduce a new word or to reinforce the meaning of a familiar word in another context? Appealing stories in film motivate language arts activities easily and effectively. In addition to a charming storyline, many well-designed primary films include carefully built-in science concepts, such as parental care of the young, obtaining food, or in the physical world, we have films that introduce us to the sea, to the wind, or to the changing seasons. And these are only a few examples of the use of film at the primary level. Mrs. Palmer will tell you about the use of film in social studies at the intermediate level.
Thank you, Miss Spaulding. I'd like to use some examples of film to illustrate learning about people. People of our world today, people of the world of yesterday. Now, of course, we use books, still pictures, maps, magazines, but I know of no better way to bring living people into my classroom than by the use of film. Please. We can go to a camel market of the North African desert to learn about life in a hot, dry land. We can go on a trapping trip with our Eskimo friends to learn about life in a cold land. We can ride with the gauchos of the Argentine pampas to watch the fast action of a roundup as we learn about life in a grassland. Or we can glide in a canoe along the banks of the Amazon River as we learn about life in a hot, wet rainforest. But films bring us more than pictures of people. They bring us experience. By a process of identification, films evoke participation in the happenings on the screen. Or, in Japan, we can help Michiko with the rice harvest. Different films bring us close to farmers in many lands of the world. Films bring us close to factory workers in different lands of the world. But whether we're learning about herdsmen in New Zealand, or in Peru, or merchants in France or in Morocco. We're learning about people. People earning a living, changing from old ways to new methods, going to school. All of these lands and peoples are part of our world, the complex, changing world in which our children are growing up today. Films can help prepare our children to take their place in the world of today and of tomorrow. Of course, the world of yesterday is part of social studies, too. Mr. Reinhardt is going to tell us more about films for history.
Thank you, Mrs. Palmer. In the intermediate grades, I've used films that were especially rich in mood, in flavor, in action. In such films, children can readily go back in time and identify with people of the past. With young Abe Lincoln learning to write in Indiana, or with an unknown boy making a pioneer journey to the Oregon country. Your youngsters can take part in historic events. They can sail on the Mayflower to the shores of the New World and celebrate with the Pilgrims the first Thanksgiving in America. Or we can relive another exciting event as told by Longfellow, the drama of the midnight ride of Paul Revere.
And lo, as he looks on the belfry's height, a glimmer and then a gleam of light. He springs to the saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes, till full on his sight a second lamp in the belfry burns. A hurry of hoofs in a village street, a sheep in the moonlight, a bulk in the dark, and beneath, from the pebbles in passing, a spark struck out by a steed flying fearless and fleet. That was all. And yet, through the gloom and the light, the fate of a nation was riding that night.
Yes, the fate of a nation was riding that night. And when you put this living history, this pageant of America into your classroom, and as you trace the growth of the nation, you'll be using a larger canvas, another dimension to bring your young people the heritage of America. That dimension is film. Now, for world history at the high school level, we can use more sophisticated films. Films designed to bring life and meaning to cultures other than our own. In such films, we see not only authentic costumes and accurate stagings of people, such as these Romans, but we see them in the original locations, in a restored Roman fort on the ramparts of the empire in Germany. Film brings to life the great figures of history. Charlemagne the Emperor will reign again. And film can not only recreate, it can report reality. Probably most of us have seen pictures of this famous pyramid in Mexico. But only film can recreate the ancient Aztec dancers and pyramid together in a living religious ceremony. Only film can employ such techniques in the teaching of history.
Thank you, Bill. Now, I'd like to touch briefly on three more areas: art, music, and literature. My point is that today, there are films designed for just about everything you have to teach. Now, I'd like to show you three short excerpts, and we'll let the examples speak for themselves. A music film, an art film, and a literature film. This film biography of Beethoven interprets his music in terms of the composer's life and times.
But Beethoven's music reflects far more than the classic tradition of the 18th century. For this century was also a time of change. The spirit of the French Revolution had surged across Europe. The common people were fighting for democracy. They were struggling for new ideals of freedom and brotherhood. These ideals influenced Beethoven. His Third Symphony, the Eroica, or Heroic Symphony, reflects the drama of the revolutionary period. Beethoven dedicated the symphony to the great French hero, Napoleon Bonaparte, who rose to power out of the revolution. Beethoven probably thought that Napoleon would preserve the liberties of the French people. When Napoleon became dictator instead, Beethoven denounced him. Some people believe that the real hero of the Eroica is Beethoven himself.
And now another film, another famous face. This is a self-portrait of Leonardo da Vinci. Let's listen to the narrator analyzing certain aspects of Leonardo's art.
So hands in this painting, as in many of Leonardo's works, do much to point up the expressiveness and drama of the scene. Graceful, expressive hands add to the beauty of one of the world's most famous paintings, the Mona Lisa by Leonardo. In this haunting portrait, in the collection of the Louvre Museum in Paris, Leonardo seems to have captured the lady's very personality. Is she beginning to smile? Or is she recalling to herself a past moment of beauty and tenderness? We shall never be certain.
And now let's move from this portrait in the history of art to the living portrait of an American author.
Mr. Twain, did you and the other boys in Hannibal really want to be steamboatmen?
Oh, yes. Boy after boy managed to get on the river. By and by, I ran away, too. I said I would never come home again till I was a pilot and could come in glory. I love that profession far better than any I've followed since. And I took a measureless pride in it.
Mark Twain's experiences as a steamboat pilot are reflected in some of his many books. Books your classes will be motivated to read after meeting the author in film. Films in these categories, music, art, literature, can be very rich emotionally, but they can be built on sound pedagogy too. For example, in the Leonardo film, that was the original Mona Lisa you saw as it hangs in the Louvre. The Mark Twain film was made in Twain's own home in Hartford, and every word the actor speaks is from Mark Twain's writings. So you see, in the modern instructional film, you're getting a product carefully designed for you, a tool that expands your teaching potential. I think our AV director of District 41 would agree, wouldn't you, Mr. Schumann?
Yes, I would, Jack.
Mr. Schumann has some science and math examples to show us. It's all yours, Ed.
Thank you very much. Well, you know, as an AV director, I'm constantly reminding our film users that there are films for their particular grade level, for their particular area, and for their particular purpose. Now, let's see if I can illustrate that with some science examples. Probably the symbol for the space age we live in is this. I thought you'd be expecting it. So I'll show it first. Of course, rockets and satellites are important and exciting. But to prepare our young people for an increasingly complex and technical world, we have to begin to lay a groundwork in science and mathematics very early. In this primary film, the children are counting pennies and experiencing a basic concept in mathematics, place value. The concept of place value can be reinforced, perhaps as a review, at the intermediate level. And it can be introduced again at higher levels. With the binary system, for example, where binary arithmetic may be related to the function of the computer. Films can show mathematical relationships quickly and graphically, as in this example of congruency. Or in this example, illustrating the derivation of the formula for the area of a triangle. The same concepts in math, of course, carry over into the physical sciences. Calculating vector forces, for example. Concepts of force and motion can be developed as early as the primary grades, with science films designed for that level. To present difficult concepts, such as the structure of the atom and nuclear energy, the special techniques that only film can employ are a must for today's classroom. And so, whether it's one for intermediate science, or one in space for general science, or one for high school physics, the point is that such special techniques are built into films correlated for your particular curriculum and grade level. Now, a little more about these techniques, such as animation, time-lapse, photomicrography, and so on. Properly used, they're extremely effective. Of course, without animation, it would be impossible to show the movement of ions in a solution during electrolysis, or the movement of molecules through the human kidney. Without photomicrography, it would be impossible to show living bacteria, or the movement of chloroplasts in a living leaf. Without time, it would be impossible to watch these flowers open. Or this grasshopper emerge in a few seconds. Without cinefluoroscopy, we couldn't show food actually being swallowed, or the living human heart. But let's remember that all these spectacular techniques are only a means to an end. That end is the total meaning that is conveyed to your students. So films can bring together many elements in a single presentation. Films can reinforce and supplement your teaching, and they can save you valuable time. For example, this looks fairly simple, doesn't it? Yet, how long would it take you to set up the boy behind the glass, get the necessary materials, and practice your artwork? Here, too, the setup is not very complex. These glass cubes and bell jar are standard equipment. But this demonstration of air pressure does take time to prepare. The film saves you that preparation time, yet preserves every important step of the performance. Could you predict exactly when the glass cubes will break? With film, you can do it every time and have your class alerted and interested.
Now, watch closely as the air pressure around the cubes becomes much less than the air pressure inside the cubes.
A chemistry teacher might perform this experiment. The melting of sodium chloride, table salt. But what you're seeing here in a few moments took 8 hours to set up and film. The temperature required to melt the salt is 800 degrees centigrade. So you see, a science film may show the same demonstration a science teacher could do, but it can also add elements beyond the demonstrator, such as these intervals being added photographically. A science teacher might use this ball in the classroom, but it's not easy to drop a ball from a tower 200 feet high, except in film. Not only can we drop the ball, we can mark the distance intervals and see the acceleration. To see how a similar experiment might have been performed, film can take us to the Leaning Tower of Pisa in Galileo's time. And then to gain more understanding of the scientific method that underlies all experimentation, we might want to see great men of the history of science. Aristotle, for example, the father of the scientific method, teaching his students. And so, from Aristotle's outdoor school 2,000 years ago to this research laboratory today, films can compress space and time to help you teach science. Now, I'd like each of you to ask yourself, do you think you can meet the requirements of your curriculum without the use of film? Thank you.
Well, Ed ended his presentation, but that wasn't the end of our meeting. I helped Ed answer questions, and we soon got into a lively discussion on film usage in other areas, guidance, physical education, and teacher training. So what I've shown you is a short version of our meeting on film usage. But that's why I used film to do it. It compresses time. Of course, as you've seen by now, film can do much more than that. Here is an educational tool that is not only one of the most powerful ever devised. It's been tried, it's been tested, and it's effective. The educational film has come of age. It offers new dimensions in teaching and is playing a major role in achieving the high goals we have set for American education.
So are you sold? Educational films are your best educational value. Yeah, that is, someone put it in the comments, that is a infomercial for Coronet. Glorious film. Maybe one day I could do a whole show of just the films that are talking about how great educational films are. No, they're all long. They're all at least, 30 minutes long. None of them are short, brief things like, films are great, we love them. Yeah, beautiful color too, holy cow. I love that. We occasionally, when we're going through in scanning, we get these batches where these are in boxes that they call preview films. So what they would do is they would make the films and then they would be lent out to schools and libraries as a way for them to determine whether or not that film was appropriate for their lesson plans so that they could buy it. And as I said before, I would sometimes run across preview prints in school archives that I acquired and realized that, yeah, they got those films and then they didn't return them. So I'm sure they got a lot of angry letters from Cornett or from whoever. But some of those preview films were never shown or never run through a projector. They're just beautiful. So I'm happy that we've run across some of those. Periodically we do. A lot of them we get are just like the ones in our collection, that they were run through a bunch of projectors. They're dirty, they're scratched, etc. Oh well, it's the nature of the beast. Thanks for tuning in today. Very much appreciate your eyeballs and your comments. And yeah, it's so nice out. I'm going to have to go to storage units, which are underground, or there's no sunlight and shelve some films and pull some films and do all sorts of things related to, yeah, we have to pull them off of shelves or out of boxes, and then we have to put them back. That's what we do all day long, every day. Boom, boom, boom. Anyways, thanks again. If you like what you saw, hit the thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet, we'd love a subscription, because that seems to correlate to the visibility of our channel to other people, and we would love that. Also, those thumbs up help. You can also donate via the Super Thanks button, via ko-fi.com/avgeeks or patreon.com/avgeeks. Those are paying for the rental of the storage units I had just talked about. So there you go. Thanks again. Oh, and I did post the film that was chosen by the audience at the Alamo on Tuesday, but just did not run through the projector very well. It was What Would Skip Do? I showed it on this channel a long time ago, but it's great. It's not, I'm not in it, but I'm in it. It is a kid very much like me, with freckles. He's a little bit older than me because it came out in '68 and I was only 2 in 1968, but it's on the YouTube channel along with all these other things. So thanks again for watching, and we will see you soon. Take care, everybody.